welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. Hi, my name is Scott Sorrell, and I'm going to be your moderator tonight. Tonight's featured guest is Dr. Clay Zimmerman. Clay presented a Real Science lecture webinar back on December 12th, 2023, and the title of his presentation was Not All Rumen-Protected Products Are Created Equal. Now, I'd recommend, if you haven't done it so far, please go back and watch that webinar. And you may even want to do that before you listen to this podcast. You can find that at balchem.com/real science. And you just simply have to scroll down until you get to the December 12th presentation. Now, Clay, you're in a little bit different chair tonight. Usually you're in the co-host chair, but tonight you're in the hot seat. So I guess my first question to you is going to be, what's in your glass tonight?
In my glass tonight is my favorite diet beverage, actually.
All right. That doesn't sound too exciting, Clay.
No, not really exciting, but that's what I have tonight.
All right. Well, Clay, I see you've brought a guest with you. Maybe she has something exciting in her glass. Would you mind introducing her and telling us why you selected her?
Absolutely. So our guest tonight is Kari Estes. Kari is our research manager. So she manages all of the external research that we do in our animal business in Balchem, and she's really an expert in this area. You know, when it comes to different methodologies for assessing bioavailability, and we'll talk some about feed stability testing as well. So she has quite a background on that and brings a wealth of knowledge to the conversation here tonight.
Excellent. Well, welcome, Kari. Glad to have you here. And as the same question I asked Clay, what's in your glass tonight? Any cherry vodka?
No cherry vodka. Definitely not. And no soda either. No diet beverage. But only the best juice box ever, which is Apple and Eve fruit punch. So
did you steal that from your kids?
Maybe.
All right. Well, I still want to hear the cherry vodka story. Maybe Mark can help us with that. So my co-host this evening is Dr. Mark Hanigan from Virginia Tech. Mark, welcome. Glad to have you in the co-host seat tonight. What's in your glass tonight?
Well, I think there's a little maker's mark that might have snuck in with the Diet Coke that was in there. So.
Oh, that's awesome. I like maker's mark tonight. I'm actually drinking a Blade and Bow. I had that at Saratoga last year at the Dairy Exchange, and I found it in a state store, and I just had to get some. I liked it then, and I like it now as well. So cheers, everyone. Looking forward to a great podcast.
Cheers.
New research is changing everything we thought we knew about choline's impact on the cow and her calf, and top scientists have a lot to say about it. They are presenting new research that supports choline as a required nutrient to optimize milk production, choline as a required nutrient to support a healthy transition, choline as a required nutrient to improve calf health and growth, and choline as a required nutrient to increase colostrum quantity. This new research is solidifying choline's role as a required nutrient for essentially every cow, regardless of health status, milk production level, or body condition score. Learn more about the science that is changing the game and the choline source that is making it happen. Reassure precision-release choline from Balchem. Visit balchem.com/scientistsay to learn more.
All right, Clay, now you're the Director of Technical Services at Balchem, and you oversee our research as well. Can you tell us, kind of get us started here, what makes Balchem an expert in rumen-protected nutrients?
Yep, great question, Scott. So first of all, as a company, we've been around since 1967. So we're 57 years into this now. really from the start. One of our starts back in 1967 was as an encapsulation company. We moved into the animal business, into the animal space in the late 1990s, with our flagship product in the ruminant space, Reassure. Reassure was introduced in the late 1990s. That was our first foray into the animal business. Was Reassure. So we've been encapsulating as a company for 57 years. We've been involved in encapsulation for ruminants for well over 25 years now, and have developed a lot of products in that space, and continue to do lots of internal R&D related to new products and improving existing products.
Very well. Thanks for that, Clay. Now, Clay, during your presentation, you outlined 4 basic attributes of an effective nutrient or rumen-encapsulated nutrient. Would you mind kind of just giving us the treetop overview of those attributes?
Yep. There's really 4 pieces to it. So if you want to start in front of the cow, the first one is feed and TMR stability. These encapsulates, they need to be able to withstand mixing in the feed mill, first of all, handling and transportation to the farm, and then TMR stability. They need to be able to survive in a TMR mix for a length of time, depending on how long that TMR sits there. So that's the first piece. The second piece, if we're developing a rumen-protected nutrient, is we need good ruminal stability. I always say if you're losing a lot in the rumen, you lose the game right from the start. So we need good ruminal stability. The third piece is we want good nutrient bioavailability. So we want to get as much as we can past the rumen, and then have that cow absorb as much of those nutrients as possible. And then ultimately, this is where Kari really comes in. We run the animal studies to prove biological efficacy in the cow. We need to be able to show that these products can get through the first 3 steps, and then actually perform in the cow to result in performance and income for the producer.
All right, Clay. So why don't we start? You said you start in front of the cow. It's got to be stable in the TMR and in the feed. So how do you go about determining whether a product is stable in the feed and the TMR? And maybe that's where we bring Kari in to talk about that.
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Kari on this piece.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So actually, working some with Dr. Hanigan here, we've been working on, I would say, perfecting a TMR stability test, at least for rumen-protected choline and lysine products. We're working on methionine. We'll get there eventually. It's just a little bit harder of a molecule to work with that we're finding out. But this technique we have based off of a published paper technique out of the Minor Institute. I think that was published in 2016. It's really a very simple technique and easy to run. So essentially we take 1 to 2 grams of the rumen-protected product based on what the nutrient composition is. And we mix that in with about 1/2 pound of TMR in just a Ziploc bag. We mix it and we let it sit for an extended period of time. So we've done previously a 0-hour time point, right? So where we just mix it and read it. And then we do a 6, a 12, and a 24-hour. And we pick those time points based on feeding schedules, right? So if you're feeding 1x, 2x, or 3x per day. Once they're done being incubated, then we put them in a strainer bag. It's actually just a paint strainer bag. and we let that sit in 1 liter of distilled water for 1 minute. That's it. And then we measure how much of the nutrient was leached into that distilled water. So it's really a simple technique, but it's very interesting, the results for sure, based on the different technologies that these different products utilize.
So, can you tell us a bit more about that, Kari? So, you mentioned technologies. What kind of differences have you seen?
So, on some of these products, I guess these commercially available products, some of them I feel like we understand well what the technology would be. Some of them maybe not so much. So, but I think when we test them in this TMR stability, you can really tell the ones that maybe have more of that matrix technology utilized, right? Where some of those nutrients might be exposed on the outside surface, right? It's not a true encapsulate like Clay mentioned in his webinar. Those products tend to release more in the TMR over time than a true encapsulate would. That's the trends that we're seeing, at least.
And how much then would you say is leached out, Kari? What percent is actually lost in the?
Yeah, it definitely varies by product for sure. So we've had some products that by 24 hours just release maybe 10 to 15%, but others release pretty much completely 100%, 80 to 100% by 24 hours. So it's all over the board.
Okay, so just to clarify, if it gets leached into the TMR, it's not going to get into the cow, right? Because it's going to be degraded by the microbes once it hits the rumen.
It'll make it into the cow, but it's not making it through the rumen intact.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. And so is it just simply the moisture that we need to be concerned about with the TMR, or is it the acids, or maybe some of the microbial activity there? Do we have a sense for that? What's degrading these Encaps?
I would say we don't know for sure, but all of those things that you mentioned are definitely possibilities. 100%. Yes.
Okay.
What about abrasion though? Do you think that the mixing, like if you mixed for 15 minutes, while you're drinking coffee and eating a donut, is that going to be too much, or is that not a problem?
Great question.
So Kari, maybe talk a little bit about the feed mixing work that we've done that for a number of years, right?
Yeah. So for the TMR stability, right, we're just putting it in a Ziploc baggie and gently rotating the bag to mix it. So obviously we're not taking that important piece into consideration. But previous to this TMR test, we've done mineral mix experiments, right? So that's actually we use a small mixer that's a ribbon and a paddle in it. And we're using minerals, which is going to be obviously much more abrasive than a TMR. So we combine, again, depending on the nutrient content of the rumen-protected product we're testing, we'll take 90 to 95 pounds of a mineral mix, and then we'll add 5 to 10 pounds of the rumen-protected product. And we mix it in that ribbon paddle mixer for 3 minutes, sample, and then we analyze that for damage.
Now, is that mixer sort of running at a similar speed to the large mixers that would be in a commercial mill?
I might defer that question to Clay.
Yeah, it's pretty close to that. Yeah.
Okay,
it's a good question, Mark.
So the shear force and so forth that it would be subjected to should be somewhat similar to a commercial mill.
Yeah, and we choose to do it in mineral mixes because that's sort of the equivalent of taking sandpaper to it, right?
Yeah,
it's about as harsh as you could do as far as from a feed mill situation.
Okay.
But yeah, of course the TMR is also the moisture and pH is going to vary there
right.
as well.
So I got to ask another question that I see, happening with some regularity. How does it hold up to pelleting?
That is a great question, Mark. We would I would not recommend pelleting any encapsulated product because all you're going to do is reduce efficacy. It may not be 100% damage, but it's going to be significant.
Mhm.
So
It's, it's
we
amazing
do
how
not recommend pelleting.
it's amazing how
Yeah,
often you see that, and it's like, my goodness, that's sort of an
yeah,
expensive ingredient to do that too.
Yeah.
yeah.
So, Clay, you don't recommend pelleting. I think that's the right answer. And yet, there are companies out there that do recommend pelleting. And I don't know what you can say about that, but um, maybe I'll take a shot at it. Right? These are all lipid products. They melt when you apply heat. They also crush when you apply pressure. And so to believe or to think that there's an advantage of one lipid encapsulate over another is it's honestly it's just not correct. And so that would be my answer. I don't know what else you'd say. But
Well, no, I would agree with all of that, and they can vary in fragility as well, right? I mean, just think about the shape and size of some of the products, right?
yeah,
It's you put them through a pellet mill, you're going to break most of the pieces of some of these end caps as well. So there are a lot of different forces here that are certainly going to be a negative for an
yeah.
end cap. So we do not recommend pelleting encapsulates. You will only hurt the efficacy of a product.
Yeah, and then one final word, Clay. So it will damage the efficacy. We don't know how much. We believe a lot, but it's going to be wholly dependent on the parameters of your pelleting equipment, right? How much pressure, how long, temperatures, all of those things. So you're going to lose some of it. So my advice would be, why lose any? There are ways to get end caps into cows without pelleting them, right? Let's
Right.
get it in the PMR. Let's get it in the TMR. One of those two. Then you don't have to worry about it. So in my opinion, that's the answer. Don't pellet. Put it in the PMR and TMR. With that, I'll get
Or
down off my stump and let's
well,
tell you,
or in a meal feed, right? A meal
or in
feed
a
or
meal feed.
mineral, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
a lot of these they do need to be mixed at a feed mill, right? Because the inclusion rates are so low. But it doesn't have to be in a pellet.
Right. Yeah. Great discussion. Mark, I'm glad you asked the question. Yeah, I've got one item I'm not sure is feed stability, but it certainly happens before the cow, and that has to do with freeze-thaw stability. And what do we know about that, Clay? What have you seen?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work on that through the years. So our products are all freeze thaw stable. We test, we've tested competitive products that occasionally we'll come across some that are not. One reason why that's definitely a must in all of our products is we do a lot of encapsulation for the human side of our business. Actually, a lot of food applications, lots of baking applications, even. So it's very critical that our encapsulates survive freeze thaw processes um, for the human side of our business. So we do not we do not produce any encapsulates that are not freeze thaw stable. If they're not, um, a true encapsulate, you'll crack the coating on it if they're not freeze thaw stable. You can actually see that. We actually have some good pictures of that under the microscope, where you can start to see the cracks in coatings that would occur. You're definitely losing ruminal stability if they're not freeze thaw stable, and you start to damage the coating at that point.
Yeah. All right. Very well.
Yep.
So then the next attribute is rumen protection. And so, Clay, in thinking about this, you would think that that would be the easiest part of the puzzle to solve, right? Just wrap the nutrient in a bunch of hard fat, and it's going to go past the rumen. And yet, that's not always the case. Can you talk a little bit about that? And what are some of the things that we've seen?
Yeah. So when it comes to ruminal stability, some of this we definitely talked about in the Real Science lecture back in December. So, and Kari alluded to this already: the true encapsulation versus matrix encapsulation, or the spray chilled products. So in general, the matrix encaps do not. They tend to have lower ruminal stability in general. Now they can vary quite a bit, and Kari can attest to this. Some of these products have basically no ruminal stability, and others have very good ruminal stability. Less than 10% loss in the rumen. So there are some pretty major differences in ruminal stability, but it's not as simple as you would think. I mean, really, this whole process, there's a lot of science behind it. We've been doing this again for 57 years, and it's a very complex process, and there are trade-offs between some of these steps too. You know, there may be some trade-offs between ruminal stability or feed stability and bioavailability, and it's really finding the perfect mix of these to make the best product from an efficacy standpoint for the farm.
Yeah. So, again, of the four steps, this is probably the one that a nutritionist or dairy farmer can test on his own farm, right, before he puts it in the cow and gain an understanding of whether or not it is rumen-protected or not. Maybe I'll ask Kari, can you speak to that and talk a little bit about that test?
Yeah, so the water test, again, another pretty easy, simple test that anybody can run. And that only uses, all you have to have is 1 gram of the product that you're testing. So it would have to be a rumen-protected choline product or a rumen-protected lysine product, because you would be measuring choline in the not choline, sorry, chloride in the solution. So you can't use it on methionine. That's what I'm getting at. But so you take 1 gram of this product that you're testing and put it in 100 grams of distilled water and let it sit for as long as you would like, pretty much. Usually 1 hour is a good time, or longer. And then you can use these chloride test strips that you just put in the water, and it'll give you a reading on there, ppm, so how much chloride is released from those products into the distilled water. And then you can do a simple calculation to figure out how much of that product was released into the water, how much of it was damaged.
What's an unacceptable level?
Definitely 100%. I would say 50%, right? Because then you got to think, like, this is just water, right? There's no microbes in here. So this is going to be probably best case scenario, right? So I would say you'd want to see something, I would like to see something less than like 10%.
So do you have a calculator or anything that you can give people to help with that calculation? Or?
So we do have, go ahead. You want to go, Scott?
No, I was just going to say we've put together these little test kits, and we've got the formula put on there of how you convert the reading on the test strip into how much of the product you've actually lost. But again, we would caution that that's one of 3 attributes that we're going to be able to measure with that. It may be able to pass that rumen stability test with flying colors or not, but then it may also then fail the next step, which is the intestinal release, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Clay, anything to add to that?
No, I just want to reiterate again. If you lose a significant amount of product in the rumen, there is no way you can have a high level of metabolizable nutrient in that product, because
it's gone.
Right? Metabolizable nutrient is rumen bypass times the bioavailability of the product. So if you don't have a good rumen bypass, you're not, no matter what the bioavailability is post-ruminally, you're going to have a low number on metabolizable nutrient. So again, you kind of lose the game from the start.
So you're saying I can't eat my cake and have it too?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, Mark, maybe a question for you, and this might be maybe a bit of an unfair question, but you've done a lot of bioavailability testing, and we'll dig into that in a little more detail in a moment. But I'm just kind of curious if you've looked at it in regards to these different steps. Have you looked at rumen stability versus intestinal release, feed stability, those kinds of things?
Well, first off, it's probably worthwhile clarifying that the I have tested is probably not accurate. Okay. I have a group that I lead that does the testing, okay?
Your
And
minions.
one
Right.
of those would be
People
like
like Kari.
Kari, and it's the students that do the testing, not me.
Yeah.
But okay, we'll use the royal we and say yes, we do that. And we've typically used an in situ type approach. So put the Encaps in a small Dacron bag, with a small enough pore size that there's minimal leakage out of the bag, and either do a time exposure, and pull out bags over time so that we can get an idea of how much leaves immediately and how much is leaving, over an 8-hour period, for example. Or we just choose like 8 hours or something that we think. I mean, we don't know how long it stays in the rumen for sure anyway. We think it's somewhere between like 6 and 12 hours, but we don't know exactly. And so we can assess that. And it's not a perfect unbiased test. There's some bias in it that we identified when we were doing the NASM work. And I don't know if that estimates that we had from that apply directly to an encap or not, but certainly with regular feeds, it underestimates some of the loss in the rumen. But nonetheless, it is a marker, right? So if you're going to compare a couple of encaps or multiple encaps to one another, yeah, the ones that have high loss are worse than the ones that have low loss, and so you can certainly rank them. And then when you get the bioavailability number, that's actually an aggregation of the loss in the rumen and the intestinal digestibility. So, to Clay's point, if you have a 30% loss in the rumen, you're down to 70 already as a maximum bioavailability if it's 100% digested in the rumen. And they're typically not 100% digested. They might be 90. So then you'd have 90 times 70. So you're down to like 63% bioavailability. So if you have another one that, looks like it's losing half of its amino acid in the rumen, well, it's never going to be 63. It's already down to a half. Okay. And so, it just adds up. And what we've seen, at times, and Kari, I think, was probably the one that was doing the work at that time, was, when we get typically when we get 85, 90, 95% ruminal protection, we get pretty much zero intestinal digestibility. So we can definitely, we've seen products where, you guys and others have done a really superb job of ruminal protection and also a very superb job of intestinal protection as well.
Of total bypass, not just rumen bypass.
Exactly, yeah. So if you're looking to dump nitrogen on the pasture or the field or whatever, this is a good way to achieve that. I might suggest that the cost of that nitrogen is a little bit expensive.
That's right.
Yeah, good point. So just to kind of summarize where we're at so far, right? We've talked about feed stability. We've talked about rumen stability and the need to be able to protect that nutrient during those first two phases. If you don't, you're already folded and you're out of the game. But if you're able to do that, now you go on to the third step, and that's intestinal release. So now you've got to be able to release that payload that you've been protecting in the previous two steps. Clay, what can you tell us about that step and the importance of it, and what are maybe some of the attributes to a quality rumen encap that makes a successful rumen encap at that third stage?
So Mark alluded to some of this. Obviously, you can either overprotect it in the rumen or underprotect it. It is a balancing act again, and there are different designs and manufacturing options in Encaps that can lead to differences in bioavailability. I think one of the challenges, quite frankly, is methodologies to assess bioavailability, and that's really where Mark and his team have really done a lot of work through the years to try to improve those methodologies, and I think I'll defer to Mark and Kari maybe to discuss that, some of these different techniques that have been used to assess bioavailability.
You gave a presentation recently at the Tri-State Nutrition Conference talking a little bit about measuring nutrient bioavailability and some different methodology that you've used and tested in the past. I'm wondering, could you maybe kind of walk us through maybe even a little bit of history? Where did you first start? You know, when you first started trying to measure bioavailability, what worked, what didn't, and then how have you transitioned and where are you today?
I think Kari can tell that story better, as good as I can, because she was at the beginning. Okay, so this is when she was a young woman, you know, that a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, something like that.
Yeah. Not too. I know. Well, that's what I was thinking is, you know, when I started volunteering in your lab as an undergrad, the techniques that we were using and how that progressed until through my master's work, we went through quite a few techniques. It's pretty impressive, actually. So in the beginning, we were doing work with the mobile bag technique. So that was using duodenal and ileal cannulated steers. And then we also had a rumen-cannulated cow. So we would take these rumen-protected products, incubate them in the rumen of the rumen-cannulated cow for 8 hours. And then we would...
In little bags, right?
Yeah, little Dacron bags, yep. And then we would put those then... we would do the abomasal incubation, right? We'd have to do that on the lab bench. So that was a 2-hour incubation in a hydrochloric acid and pepsin mixture. And then we would introduce one little baggie at a time into the duodenum and attempt to catch them at the ileum. So putting them in at the small intestine or at the beginning of the small intestine and catching them at the end of the small intestine. So that technique is really cool, right? Because it's very segmented. So we can test for just ruminal stability or release, and then abomasal, and then intestinal, right? But it definitely had its challenges for sure. I will say that the cannulas are hard to maintain on our animals that we had. It's doable. They just require a lot of attention. And the transit times was another big problem. So bags would pass each other in the intestine, which was interesting, even though you're metering them in every 30 minutes. Sometimes you wouldn't catch them at the ileum, and so they come out in the feces, which is fine, but that might be 24 hours till they come out there. So those, I would say, were some of the biggest drawbacks from that technique. Anything else you can think of on that one, Dr. Hanigan?
No, I think those are the big ones. I mean, it was difficult to get reproducibility. So we would use soybean meal as a control, and we could get numbers for soybean meal from 30 to 120. Okay. And so, so it just, in the end, we just, you know, and actually it was Balchem that said, hey, this is not going to probably get us the numbers we need. So what did we go to next, Kari?
So then we did the abomasal pulse dose trials. So that one's also pretty interesting in that it's segmented also. So we incubate the products, again, in Dacron bags in the rumen for 8 hours. And then we, using those same rumen-cannulated cows, we introduce an infusion line into the abomasum. And after it's incubated in the rumen, then we take the contents, the remaining contents and of the products, and we dose them into that abomasal line. And we measure blood over time, so before, during, and after that infusion, and analyze that for the amino acid that we're interested in, so methionine, lysine, whatever it is. And we can look and see how the products release over time or how they appear in the blood. and we use an area under the curve equation to calculate bioavailability of those products. So
we compared that to just a regular infusion of unprotected amino acid, right? To get
yes,
the maximum.
yes. And so for that technique, it also has its pros and cons as well with like the mobile bag, but one of them had to do with the infusion of the raw, because we weren't quite matching the release curves between the raw and the products that we were infusing, which could bias the results some. So we did modify that, and I think we made the technique better from that perspective. But that technique, at least in my opinion, seems to favor some encapsulation technologies over others, like a pH trigger product, right, is going to hit the abomasum and release very rapidly. And so it's going to have a much different looking curve to it than a product like a fat-coated product that is going to have a slower release as it moves through the intestine. So you'll have two very different curves that you could be comparing to one another. You have any other thoughts on that one, Dr. Hanigan?
No, I mean, in the end, we found that it seemed to always rank the various products correctly, but the absolute values were not, did not match up into our other ways of assessing things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was sort of our feeling, internally too. It to use it as a ranking tool, basically.
Mm-hmm. So then the next technique is that we worked on at least, was the stable isotope technique. And that one is a completely in vivo technique, unlike the mobile bag and the abomasal pulse dose trial. And we actually, at least in the experiment I ran, we did use rumen-cannulated cows for more of validation of the technique. But I know now, I think, Dr. Hanigan, you're not even using rumen-cannulated cows for stable isotopes. So that's one plus.
We do sometimes. It depends on whether people want that number or not.
Right. Essentially, we would feed the product to the cows. The cows do have to be in steady state condition for this technique to work. So we feed the cows the products, and then on the last day of each period, the cows receive an infusion of a stable isotope. And essentially that's used as a tracer. So we look at the dilution of that isotope in the plasma of these cows to calculate bioavailability after they've been fed these products. So I think it's probably one of the better techniques, certainly, that it's totally in vivo. I know, Dr. Hanigan, you've done a lot of experiments since I have been there, further perfecting the technique, which has been good, especially for rumen-protected products as well.
It's generally still the same. We're just using longer infusion periods now.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, would you consider then this last test that you've evolved to, is this pretty much the penultimate? Is this the methodology? Is it as accurate as it can get, or do you continue to see further enhancements or perhaps a different methodology down the road?
Well, we still, it's quite a bit of math involved with it, and it always does a lot of work to get the data calculations all done and have confidence that we have the right numbers. So we've talked with Clay and Kari about helping develop this a little bit further, and so the idea would be that if we could get away from the infusion, that would help, and if we could take the cows and put isotope in them long enough for them to reach steady state, it would get rid of all the calculation complexity. So that means we need to get a cheaper source of isotope. So rather than using the purified amino acids, that we purchase, they actually derive those by growing algae under a carbon-13 labeled CO2 atmosphere until they get labeled up to like 95 or 98%. And then they have to kill them and then isolate all the protein out of it and then hydrolyze the protein to amino acids and clean it all up. So there's a lot of cost to getting that. So what we thought was, well, maybe we could just protect, it doesn't have to be perfect, but protect the algae itself and then just feed the algae. And then it's cheaper. It's a lot cheaper to buy the algae than it is to buy the isolated amino acids. So we're thinking that maybe that might allow us to do more animals, which would give us more precision. It would allow the technique to be simplified because of steady state conditions being reached with the isotope as well. It's not different. It's still the same concept. It's just trying to simplify it and also get some more replication to try to make it even more precise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
good conversation.
We don't know the answer yet to that. Okay.
Yeah, but that is like a little bit more like the selenomethionine technique.
Exactly.
Too,
that would be very, very similar then, right? We're using a naturally occurring, if you consider that adding a little extra carbon-13 to the environment is natural, but there is net carbon-13 already there. We're just enriching it. And same thing with the, that yeast, you're selecting a line of yeast that tend to, and you're giving them a lot of selenium, trying to coax them to putting more into the methionine, which they do. So the advantage of this approach would be that we can then look at any of the essential amino acids, where the selenomethionine is only going to be methionine. We don't really have any other ways of doing it.
Right.
And can you only do that with amino acids, or could you apply that technique to choline, niacin, other nutrients?
We think we can apply it to other nutrients, which is one of the other reasons we wanted to use. We could have used like purified protein from the algae. It would have been slightly more expensive, but we wanted to try the algae because it will have all nutrients labeled in it. And so we're thinking that there are probably additional, opportunities to try to assess bioavailability of those other nutrients, such as you mentioned. Yeah. There's a lot of work that has to go into that. And I'm not going to be the person that's doing that. I never was going to be, but I'm not even going to be in charge of that. Tachi Fernandez is a new faculty, or will be a new faculty in the department. She's been, she was sort of Kari's fourth iteration replacement, and so she's interested in doing that because she has interest in microbial metabolism and other things as well. So.
Great. It's good to hear there's somebody to pass the baton to, Mark. You've done a great job. Clay, we've talked a lot about bioavailability. Let's talk a little bit about the importance. Why is it important to get that right? We've spent a lot of money, a lot of effort getting that right. So why is it important?
It's very important, right? Because as we put products into the market, you have to be able to model those in the nutritional models. So the bioavailability is a really key part of that, to make sure we're feeding these products at the correct rates from an animal performance standpoint. So we put a lot into assessing bioavailability, particularly on the amino acid side of things, where we're actually balancing for that as a nutrient in the diet.
All right. So we've perfected some methodologies for measuring bioavailability, but yet there's companies out there still using in vitro models. We use in vitro models, but not necessarily give us bioavailability. Can you talk a little bit about that, Clay? Is maybe where's some of the downsides to the in vitro models? How do we use them? And then Kari, I think you had some comments as well.
Yeah. So they're a very key. These in vitro techniques, they're a very key piece of product development. You cannot economically get products to market if you have to put every prototype through an animal study. It's impossible to do that. So it's very important to have some methodologies to rank prototypes and to get your initial assessments. So we do our initial screenings with in vitro techniques to try to do the best we can, mimicking what would actually happen in the cow. So that's a very key part from a product development standpoint. But it's not the final answer. The final answer is measuring these in vivo, and then really ultimately measuring performance in the animal. That's where it all comes together. But Kari, I know part of your master's work was actually assessing some of these in vitro techniques. So maybe you can expound upon that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yes, as you mentioned, Dr. Hanigan and I we have a paper that was published in Translational Animal Science comparing some in vivo techniques to two different in vitro techniques, one being a 3-step procedure and another one being a pepsin digestibility assay. So in that paper, we looked at blood meal, feather meal, and a rumen-protected lysine prototype. So with that prototype, it was tested in a lactation trial, a pulse dose trial. So those were the 2 in vivo experiments. And then in this 3-step procedure, which is performed at, I know it's at least offered at 2 commercial laboratories. So we were not actually running the in vitro tests. We sent the samples out to a third party for analysis. So, and basically what we found was that the in vitro test did grossly underestimate the bioavailability of that prototype when compared to the 2 in vivo methods. So I think there's some reasons behind that. Primarily when we look at what the enzyme cocktails are that are used in the procedure itself. So, and again, I think these procedures can favor certain technologies as well, right? So if you have a pH sensitive product, then all that really matters for you would be that there's an abomasal step, right? But for fat-coated products, you're going to want to make sure that that intestinal piece at least has the enzymes that would be in the animal to break down fat, right? So we explained some of that in the paper if people are interested in reading it, but I think it could be improved upon. I think in vitro techniques are super important for our industry, right? They're quick, they're easy, they're cheap. But we can do better, I think, to have them match more of what's happening in vivo, or we just use them as a ranking tool.
The other part I would add to that as well is, the in vitro techniques, they're not taking into account the feed and TMR stability piece of this. So, you can draw some pretty erroneous conclusions here.
Yeah, Clay, would it be a step too far to say that one of the other attributes is sometimes they're just flat wrong, right? I mean, we've had times when we've been testing products and they've led us astray.
Yeah.
We've been doing this for a very long time. So anyway, it's... yeah, you got to be very cautious with them. There's probably 4 different ones that we use, different ones for different nutrients, and yeah, proceed cautiously. Anyway, any other thoughts related to in vitro test?
So my caution would be if you see products that are only showing in vitro results, I'd be very skeptical, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, good point.
I think that's we've already talked about that, but there's a difference between ranking. I mean, if you have 100 Encaps that you want to, prototypes that you want to screen, as Clay said, you can't afford. I mean, we charge like 20,000 an Encap to so I don't know. You have to do that out, but I mean, it's a lot of money, all right, and a lot of time. It would take us years to do that. Okay,
It'd only
so
be $2 million, Mark.
yeah, so you can't do that, in real time and make any progress. So you want to screen that 100 down to 3 or 4 or 5, right? Using something that maybe is not accurate, but hopefully is ranking correctly. And even
Right.
if it's off a little bit, okay, well maybe when you go test them in the cows, 3 of them rank like they're supposed to, and the other one's just way off. Okay, well you're still way better off than trying to test all 100s.
Yeah. Great
Right.
point, Mark. Clay, your last step was biological response. What do you want us to know there?
So that is the key last step, right? That's where you could take all of this into account. Then, right? The feed and TMR stability, ruminal stability, and intestinal availability. So that's ultimately where we end up, is running these animal studies to prove efficacy of the product. So I'd caution people again, don't rely just on in vitro data. But I was always skeptical when I was presented with products that just had no animal data behind them, no performance data. I want to see that too. I always want to see that as a nutritionist.
And so talk a little bit about animal data, Clay. Is all animal data created equally as well?
No. It all depends on how the trials are set up and really, who's running the trials, right? So ultimately, you want independent peer-reviewed data that's out there. So yeah, there are big differences in studies that are so-called studies that can be done, and there's really kind of a pyramid behind that from an animal study standpoint. Lots of studies obviously are preferred, like we have with Reassure, right? We now have over 41 peer-reviewed publications on our Reassure product, for instance. That's huge, right? To have that kind of data behind products. But we do all of our work with independent researchers, either universities or private research institutions.
Yeah, kind of what I was getting at too, Clay, is field trials. You'll see people show up with some field trial data and say, "Hey, our stuff works wonderful." And as you know, we just simply won't do a field trial as research. There's just too many things that can and will go wrong each and every time. Never seen one work yet, Clay. Maybe you're better at it than I
No,
was.
they're not controlled animal studies.
Exactly. Usually don't have a control, right? Or if you try to do a control, then the farm sort of gets grumpy about all the extra work the feeder
Right.
does, and sort of doesn't, follow the protocol. And so without a control, I mean, God, it's just a crapshoot whether you can actually see something or not.
Yeah.
So I would just add one more comment on the, on the biological response side. The product could be fine, right? And if the cows don't respond, is it because there's a water quality issue or a water quantity issue, a stress issue, are the cows comfortable? I mean, there's a whole laundry list of things that could be going on that might compromise the response in a cow, and it's not the product's fault. Okay, so
That's a good point.
I tend to focus less on that. I know everybody wants the production data, but hey, I probably run 8 lysine trials, and I don't hit more than 50% on those. Okay, so either I'm really bad at doing these, or there's just stuff that happens, and these are all research trials on a research farm with controls.
Yeah, great point. Well, this has been a great discussion, but I think it's time maybe to call last call. I usually wait until I've run out of bourbon, but that happened about 30 minutes ago. I think I was just kind of excited about the conversation, and anyway, we'll move on from that. But let's call last call, and Kari, why don't you start us off? What's kind of a few takeaways that you think the audience should take away from this discussion?
Our last call question is sponsored by AminoSure XM Precision Release Methionine, the next generation in amino acid balancing. With AminoSure XM, you can save up to 5 cents per cow per day on your methionine investment. Try it today and receive an additional 2.5 cents per cow per day savings with Balchem's limited time rebate offer. Contact your Balchem representative to learn more.
Not all Encaps are created equal. Mic drop. Just kidding.
Nice.
No, I would say that. And I don't know. I guess I think about from a nutritionist standpoint or somebody who's, trying to pick which product they're going to be using in their ration, ask to see the data that these companies would have. And does the research hit these pillars that we just went through, right? And I would say pay attention to the techniques that are used as well.
Yeah. Well said, Kari. Mark, would you have anything to add to your star pupil?
Well, I would go to, I've forgotten who is credited or who stated this, but I do remember that Gordon Thompson, who I worked with for a number of years, had a really keen sense of humor, and he had this posted on his desk. Anyone who thinks something is foolproof simply hasn't met a sufficiently talented fool yet. Okay, so you can take a perfectly good encap, and some fool can actually screw it up, all right? By pelleting it, by mixing it too long, by not feeding it correctly. But you can't take a bad one and make it good.
Yeah, well said. Clay, final words.
Final words. I've been at Balchem 10 and a half years now, but for 22 years before that, I was a nutritionist, right, for 2 feed companies. So I was part of the meat market, right? You're bombarded with products all the time from companies. So you're constantly being faced with making these product decisions. What product should I use? So I think Kari said it well. Look, ask for the data. Needs to be credible data. The more data, the better. And I think we're only starting to scratch the surface on the feed stability piece of this. We need a lot more work in that area. It's been really overlooked, I would say. So that's a key piece to these products being effective in the field.
All right, very well, Clay. Well, Clay, you did a nice job being our featured guest this evening. Unfortunately, next time we'll have to put you back in the co-host seat, but that's all right. Mark, Kari, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you guys coming along. To our loyal listeners, once again, as always, thank you for coming along with us. We hope you learned something. We hope you had some fun, and we hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests, so please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.